When we are in the process of choosing a topic, I like to think of it like shopping. You want to go ahead and make sure that it's something you're interested in, something that you actually like, but you also want to make sure that there's a degree of resources, enough variety, enough materials that are actually there so you feel confident that whatever you're choosing is actually something you could pursue because you're going to have to read a lot about it before determining what you want to argue. So here we have one particular database that I think is very helpful in this process. This is the History Study Center, which is put out by ProQuest, which are the same people who do the historical newspapers database, which you will undoubtedly use. And absolutely, they have a variety of stuff in this. There are secondary sources, primary sources, reference articles. If it's more modern, they have video, they have plenty of images, maps, you name it. And you could simply go ahead and do a search if you had some great search term that you wanted to go ahead and look. But for today, when we talk about choosing a topic, I want to show you the study units because I actually think this is a great way to get an overview sense of what might be out there and what could be a possible topic to use. Obviously, for our purposes, we're going to choose American history. And notice that they divided up by time period. Clearly, the 1865 to 1918 covers the bulk of our time period that we're looking at. So now take a look at the actual study units that they have. A general one on Reconstruction. They have the Compromise of 1877. They have a big one that's just on the Gilded Age itself. But look at it going a little deeper. You have the New South, specific presidents. You have the start of the Progressive Era, more presidents, foreign policy. Here we're getting a little bit beyond what we need, but here's American society and culture over a broad swath that might go ahead and have it. The beginning of movie making is happening during this time period. A topic that often goes unrealized is the subordination of American Indians. The late 19th century, there were some really interesting and horrible things that were happening in that time period that reflected larger societal views of the other, and that could be really interesting. Race relations, criminal justice, education, media. Here's one that's just on popular culture in the Gilded Age, so movies, music, books, that kind of a thing. The railroad, religion, the temperance movement, which of course were leading up to prohibition. You have women in America, which probably is going to mostly focus on suffrage, but could have other really interesting ideas like women in education. So let's go ahead and pick one of these to actually go ahead and look at. Let's take a look at the New South, and you can get a sense of how each of these is constructed. The first thing that they do is they assume you don't know anything, which I really like because often I do pick a topic and I don't know much about it. So here we go ahead and have a very brief overview kind of explaining what they mean about this particular study unit. So here we have the period of the New South. It's talking about the late 1870s to about the First World War, the types of issues that were happening in that time period, and maybe something more specific. Movements like the Bourbon Society promoted the new laws of racial segregation. I have never heard of the Bourbon Society before. That sounds really interesting. If they were instrumental in giving the Jim Crow laws. And then, of course, they mention the Ku Klux Klan as well. Notice they are also going ahead and mentioning key Black historical figures like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. So that's kind of an interesting tie-in as well. The next thing it does after giving you that synopsis is it gives you the highlights. So it wants to tell you what are the key articles or resources that it has that it thinks kind of encapsulates this entire topic in one fell swoop. So here we've got a reference article on Jim Crow laws. Here we have an actual 1869 article called The Hope of the South. Here's a Harper's Bazaar, which is a very popular magazine at the time, 1876, The Southern Industrial Project. And then there's an image of Virginia cigarettes, which I think is really interesting that I'm going to want to go ahead and know more about. But now it gives you just list after list of resources that it thinks helps you understand this particular topic of the New South. So here are key reference articles that it thinks you need to understand in order to go ahead and understand the New South. Here we have Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, two biography articles from reference sources that are really helpful. Here's an animated map on race relations in the United States from 1865 to 1920, and similarly the population and economy spanning a similar time period. Clearly those are going to be two key things. Then it goes ahead and actually lists primary sources. So this is usually speeches, newspaper articles, magazine articles, journal articles from the time period. And if it's got the little box, that was one of the highlighted ones we saw at the beginning. But you can go ahead and see it looks like this. Edwin de Leon did a series of articles in Harper's about the New South. Here's something on historically black schools. You can go ahead and see that it's really trying to give you often a very chronological view of the evolution of an idea or an event. And that can be a really useful thing because I think we tend to think chronologically over things developing. So to have that primary source from the time period is really useful. Then we have images. Sometimes there are some videos. This is probably later because of what they're talking about. And obviously, video didn't exist early. So you're probably talking very early film stuff from the 20th century at the very beginning or very, very late 19th century. But then we have journal articles. So now we have historians actually writing in retrospect, analyzing primary sources in order to give us a sense of perspective in terms of what we need to go ahead and think about. And we always want a combination of secondary and primary. Primary so we can interpret it ourselves and offer it as evidence, and secondary so we can go ahead and look at people who have tried to study this and glean the best ideas from them. So you can see there's really a variety of things here, which quite frankly, thinking about our recent monument stuff is sort of fascinating. The commemoration of Robert E. Lee's death and the obstruction of Reconstruction in New Orleans, flag culture and the consolidation of Confederate nationalism, schooling along the color line. This is all really, really interesting. And you can see most of the time they actually mention the time period, which is useful. The myth of the New South. Notice they also have some web links, which are really great because it means that they're pre-vetted so you can feel really comfortable using them if historians and librarians have thought they're a good idea. And just in case this isn't exactly what you're interested in, or you're sort of interested in it, but you're not quite sure, it gives you related study units as well that it thinks has to do with the time period. So obviously our Gilded Age one popped up. You can also see race relations, and so much of this has to do with that. You can go ahead and see in there, as well as issues surrounding Reconstruction, which obviously founded a lot of the foundation for the New South. So this gives you a sense of how the History Study Center can be a great jumping off point in taking a look at various resources and just giving you an idea and inspiring you as to think about what are the kinds of topics that are out there.